Welcome to another edition of the Bleav in Steelers show. Special guest today, so let's pay the bills first. Today's episode is brought to you by BetOnline.ag. We're into the conference championship games. Chiefs, Ravens, 49ers, Lions. If you want to place a bet on any of the action, BetOnline.ag is the place to do it. Use our promo code Bleav, that's BLEAV, to receive your 50% welcome bonus on your first deposit. BetOnline, where the game starts. Welcome into Bleav in Steelers. I'm Mark Bergin, joined by special guest today, and we've had him here on the Bleav in Steelers show in the past. He covers the Pitt Panthers for the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. He is also the host of the Locked On Steelers podcast. Welcome in, Christopher Carter. Chris, good to see you.
Good to see you as well, Mark. Glad to be back on the show.
It's been too many moons, and I'm going to leave this very open-ended to start our discussion tonight. Okay. Mike Tomlin talking with reporters, media members last week. There's a lot of takeaways. He was very candid in speaking with reporters. But if there was one thing you could take away from what he said last week, what would that be? We'll go from there.
Ooh, one thing to take away. I think he had an honest assessment of where things were for a lot of people, and including the leaders on the team, the quarterback situation. I think, okay, I'll go with this. When asked about the quarterback situation, he said, hey, Kenny Pickett, yep, he's the starter, and he threw that but in there very quickly, but he's going to have competition. And that competition could be Mason Rudolph. It could be any number of free agents. It could be a rookie draft pick. I think it could be a mix of both. But it is clear that Mike Tomlin, he has to walk the wire when you're a coach. And it's funny, I was just talking with Jeff Capel, Pitt basketball's head coach, about this. But you have to walk a wire where your part of your job as a coach is to make sure that your players believe in themselves. Tell them the truth. Coach them hard. But make sure that, like, at the end of the day, your job is to make sure their confidence has a chance to go up. And part of that could also be, getting in their face and grilling them and doing stuff like that. But every coach has their different way of doing that. Mike Tomlin isn't going to come out and say, man, Kenny Pickett stinks, get him out of here. But he's going to say, hey, we believe in Kenny Pickett. If you're the head coach, you got to say that about the quarterback that you want to become your starter and to, or earn the starting job back. Or I guess he didn't lose it, but you get my point. You want him to develop into a franchise quarterback, but you also can't pigeonhole yourself until, well, he's just our guy. Because then you send mixed messages. Then if he gets replaced, then it's like, well, you promised me something. And the way that he addressed the media tells me that Mike Tomlin has not promised Kenny Pickett anything other than you will have the opportunity to prove that you are still the starter of this football team in 2024.
Yeah, I'm with you. I'm with you. And let me kind of walk you through how I think this plays out. So sure. I think you exercise the out with Mitch Trubisky, which will be about $4 million, but I just don't see any upside in keeping him in the room in a premium for a third string role. I think you try to bring Mason Rudolph back on the cheap, but there's no doubt about the fact that he's going to make more than the league minimum. It's just a matter of how much. I would try to say, hey, the money we're allocating to Mitch, we can pay you maybe a 2-year contract worth about $10 million total. How does that sound? But what is his value relative to the other teams with the 4 starts that he made at the back half of the season? Because even in a 4-game sample size, in my opinion, he was the Steelers' best quarterback. And then with Pickett, it's like, even if you're Kenny's biggest fan, 2 seasons now where he hasn't been able to get through the course of the whole season healthy, and then a sophomore year where he only throws 6 touchdown passes. Like, I know a lot of that is coaching. And that's the reason why you fire Matt Canada midseason, something the Steelers haven't done with a coach or coordinator since the World War II era in 1941. But I think you'd probably start next season with Pickett as QB1 for maybe the first 8 games and see where you're at from there. But I think it's really going to be contingent upon, can you bring Mason Rudolph back on the cheap on a team-friendly deal?
I agree. And you're right. I'm not sure he takes a team-friendly deal. I mean, I think it'll be friendly in the sense that it won't bankrupt the Steelers if he took it, but it won't be like he's going to go explore and he's going to go see what he can get from other NFL teams, which last year was nothing. And you know what? Mason Rudolph didn't have much of a track record to prove that he deserved. And he even admitted, he was like, hey, I was considering commercial real estate. like he told us that straight up after the Bengals game. And I think that now with 3 really good games, as a good game managing quarterback that were essentially playoff games. The Steelers lose any of those, they're out the playoffs. And then not a good playoff game, but a gutsy one where he hung in there. He made tough throws against a really good Bills team. I think someone's going to go look at that and say, that's good number 2. And if he can get $8 to $10 million, someone might throw a bag at him like that. He'll take that and run away with it. I'm not sure if the Steelers would pay him that much. They might pay him like 5 to 7, maybe 5 to 8, like squeeze that in there and make it maybe like a 2-year deal where it builds up or something. But I think that's the dilemma the Steelers are under, is if someone else comes calling Mason, and he has every right to goes off with that. The only thing that might save that is if you're Mason Rudolph, you think, well, I do know these guys, and I do know these receivers, these tight ends, this offensive line, and there is a built confidence around me. Whereas if I go somewhere else, there's no one who has my back. And that might be the one thing that makes him want to stick around. And I think it would be healthy for the Steelers if he did stick around, because I think he did a good job managing the team in those last 3 games. And it should be an honest quarterback competition, whether it's Rudolph, Pickett, and a rookie or another vet or whoever. Have him come in, and if he earns it in camp, he earns it in camp, and he starts, and then you see where it goes from there. But you don't hide it, Kenny Pickett, from competition. He has to go up and prove that he's the starter in this upcoming camp.
The moment you get to about $10 million per season with Rudolph, which is where I'm like, you're paying a premium, because I look at Trubisky, they paid him something about $8 million this past year. He was the 28th highest paid quarterback in the league this past season. Mm-hmm. And you didn't get that premium backup when Pickett goes down. That's what you were paying Trubisky for. And that was this frustration. And like, everyone's like, well, Tomlin didn't move off Trubisky fast enough to get to Rudolph. And I'm like, look, I can point to 8 million reasons why, because Rudolph came back on the cheap, a little bit more than $1 million league minimum this past season. You were paying Trubisky a premium. So then your third string quarterback's making $8 million a year as the 28th highest paid quarterback in the league. Like, get out of here.
Yeah. Like that money is a big factor in this. And also, like, let's be real. Mitch Trubisky also gave some gutsy performances for the Steelers last year. Like when Kenny Pickett got hurt, he helped them fight through some tough games. I want to say the Bucs game, the Saints game, definitely the Panthers game. And if he doesn't come through in those moments, the Steelers might finish with a losing record last season. I think he deserved a chance to prove himself. But I think this is also part of Mike Tomlin and part of what does make him a good coach. Mike Tomlin doesn't bail on guys when they make him look bad. You know, like even when Mason Rudolph in that Ravens game, in the monsoon, Mason Rudolph wasn't having a good game for a bit. Mike Tomlin never wavered, never said, "Hey, Kenny, go warm up" or anything like that. Gave him his chance, and then sure enough, fourth quarter, bang, Rudolph hits the slant to Deontay, and it's a touchdown. And it's like, that's what I get for banking on my guy. He banked on Mason Rudolph, just like he banked on Mitch Trubisky, just like he banked on Kenny Pickett. He believes in his guys, and that's what your job is as a head coach, to give them that opportunity. And you see it with George Pickens. George Pickens just all national attention on he won't block, and he's an attitude, and this, that, and the third. And he was just like, I'm talking to him. It's fine. And then George Pickens gives him 300 plus yards in back-to-back games, showing everyone like, hey, he is that guy. He just has to grow up a little bit. I think that's just who Mike Tomlin is.
If not Pittsburgh, what are some potential landing spots for Mason Rudolph?
You know, I hadn't thought about that. I kind of have to see how free agency shakes out, who, because other teams are going to make their cuts. Any team that has a young quarterback and needs a veteran,
just thinking out loud here, I'm thinking maybe Atlanta, depending on who they bring in other than just Mason Rudolph. Mason Rudolph wouldn't be the Falcons' only quarterback acquisition, but seeing what happens from a draft standpoint and then free agency, somewhere where he has the potential to start, that would just be one team I would throw out there where on paper it's where's an area where potentially he could start, where it's I don't think there's going to be a team in the league where it's yes, he's the guy, he's QB1. No. He'd have to win a competition of some sort.
No, I agree. It's been a competition thing, but I even think it'll also be people just want stability at their backup quarterback spot for a young quarterback, like a Carolina Panthers with Bryce Young in that situation, or Gardner Minshew's a free agent. The Colts with Anthony Richardson, if he goes down and gets hurt, Shane Steichen's gonna be like, hey, what if I can get Mason Rudolph to work here? I think that there's a number of places for a solid backup number 2 quarterback. There's always a job for that. So if anything, I think Mason Rudolph, he'll either have a job with the Steelers or have a job with someone. And I think that's one of those tough things because, like, I don't necessarily pay attention to which teams have the best number 2 quarterbacks. You know what I'm saying?
Right. But there's always a need for that. If I had to guess, he would be back in a Steelers uniform. But again, it goes back to how much is he worth? And then how much is another team willing to pay? And certainly he's earned himself some money. Like, this is not going to be like last offseason where it's like, oh, league minimum, I guess I'll come back to Pittsburgh, because he tested the waters and there just wasn't a whole lot there. I do think he'll wind back up in Pittsburgh. We'll see how that shakes out in the offseason. Any final thoughts about the quarterback? Then we can move on to a few other topics, Chris.
Just that I do think the Steelers will explore the quarterback position in the draft, because especially if they can get Mason Rudolph or a veteran that they trust, like a Tyrod Taylor, even just someone who they know is battle tested in the NFL and can push Kenny Pickett to at least give a standard NFL performance at quarterback. If they can find that guy in free agency or just bring back Mason Rudolph, I anticipate the Steelers maybe use a 3rd, 4th, maybe a 5th round pick at quarterback to get another young quarterback in there, a young arm who they can develop. And if Kenny Pickett doesn't work out, maybe that guy's the next bridge quarterback before you take your next big shot at the position. But I can foresee that being part of the plan moving forward.
I've been saying that for weeks, and if Kenny Pickett can't handle it, and by his demeanor, I think he will be able to, but we've seen other teams do this. The Eagles did it with Jalen Hurts, moving off Carson Wentz. The 49ers moved off Trey Lance in the 3rd pick with Brock Purdy. The Cowboys did it with Dak Prescott back in the day. So I'm not saying abandon ship with Kenny Pickett quite yet, because you did spend that draft capital with the 20th overall pick 2 years ago now. But we'll see. We'll see how this shakes out. The quarterback carousel is one of my absolute favorite things in free agency. So it will be fun to watch. But speaking of Steelers offense as well, Chris, the offensive coordinator search. And it was music to my ears to hear that the Steelers are finally going to hire from outside the organization. Again, we could take this in a number of directions. Who should the Steelers target? Why should they target that person? In an ideal world, if we gave you the keys to the Cadillac, who are you calling up on the phone first to try to become the Steelers' new OC?
Well, we know that they're calling Zac Robinson, the passing coordinator for the Rams. That's an interesting interview there. I think that I need to know a few things first. One, Eric Bienemy is someone that I am trying to talk to. I know he's still under contract with the Commanders, but with the changes that they're going to be going through there, maybe he wants out, or there could be something orchestrated to bring him over. I think the Steelers really need an offensive coordinator who knows how to run a room, knows how to talk to a quarterback, and can get everyone pointed in the right direction, because that was Matt Canada's biggest weakness. Everyone wanted to talk about play calls and this, that, and the third. But to me, the biggest thing was week to week, nobody was sure what the goal, why the plan was, what it was to get to the goal to score a touchdown. Like there was not a full 100% belief in like, hey, like I know that this is our play, but like I don't understand like how to go through my progressions if I'm Kenny Pickett, or the offensive line not being sure like when to get to the second level, when to be aggressive, those type of things. And you need someone to be pointed in doing that. And you want an experienced person who's been an OC, not just a position coach who you think can emerge into a play caller, unless you think that's the move you want to make. I think the Steelers would behoove themselves to get an experienced offensive coordinator and then try to find one of those other guys who want to be an offensive assistant, who wants to be a quarterback coach or a passing game coordinator who they can bring in and say, hey, you are going to be responsible for working closely with Kenny Pickett and this receiving crew and making sure that they're firing on all cylinders and contributing to the overall game plan that's organized by Bienemy, Kellen Moore, whoever is the experienced offensive coordinator that they've brought in. That, I think, would be the ideal situation. But if the Steelers want to get young and innovative and bring in one again, Robinson, he's a McVayite. He's from that coaching tree. You want to dip into that pool of people. I'm not against that at all. I think that would be a fine move. But I feel like just for the way that they've gone things, you don't want as much of an experiment at the OC position. You want someone who's has a proven track record of bringing success.
Yeah, let me talk about Bienemy, and then I'll get to Robinson really quickly. Let me start with Bienemy, and if you have any thoughts, hop in, Chris.
Sure.
He eventually will become a head coach. It's honestly, I'm tired of talking about the storyline of, oh, he interviewed this, then he should have a head coaching job and all of that. Washington is essentially a blank canvas with new ownership. I know Bob Myers is coming over from the Golden State Warriors. I don't know if they'll keep Eric Bienemy there with Ron Rivera fired, the head coach. Bienemy, though, 37 pass attempts. He ran the ball fewest of any team in the league. And that's not really the Steelers' MO with Najee and Jalen Warren with the ground game and establishing that, setting up play action. So that to me would need to be, if you bring in Eric Bienemy and just what his philosophy has been with the points that they put up in Kansas City and then what he did with Sam Howell this past season in Washington, it would just be a contrast from what the Steelers have done. So that's where I am at with Bienemy. With Robinson, the thing, and they say, well, Canada had facets of, a McVay or a Shanahan offense with what, in my opinion, was wasted motion. And here's what I mean by this. And this was a change in a difference that I noticed when Eddie Faulkner and Mike Sullivan took over as play caller and interim OC, respectively. Was the motion wasn't always wasted motion, because under Canada's offense, the moment a motion man went by the quarterback and wasn't getting it on an end round, number one, the ball's not going to that player. Number two, the ball's probably going in the opposite direction. And if we can pick this up watching the games each week, Chris, I can't even imagine what it's like for opposing defenses that have been able to scout the Steelers a full week in advance. So people will be like, well, Canada had elements of Shanahan and McVay. And it's just like, no, not really, sort of, but not really. And that's why he lost his job mid-season, because point blank period, they weren't getting it done. First game, they get a 400-yard game. It wasn't perfect with the interims, but I do think it was better than what we saw with Matt Canada. I'd love to know your thoughts about my thoughts. Hop in here.
No, listen, Matt Canada, like he deserved to be fired for what was going on there. I thought some of the wasted motion was also part of the process of not choosing the right receivers to throw to with the quarterbacks. And there were times where the guy who was in motion was the guy that was open, and why didn't you throw to him? And like there was plenty of times where it was like, if you probably remember the second Browns game, they're in the red zone and Kenny Pickett drops back. Deontay Johnson runs the slant. No one runs with him. Like, it was the perfectly called play, wide open, hit him 5 yards in front of you, literally in the middle part of the field. He walks into the end zone. They score a touchdown, probably win the game, which puts an entire different spin on the season. Canada also probably doesn't get fired, which means who knows what the heck happens after that, but like that moment right there, I was just like, he's completely lost. Kenny Pickett is. And that's where I point to the biggest weakness of Canada was coming into the week. Hey guys, this is what the Browns do. This is how we're going to attack them. We're going through all these these are our calls, these are our switches, these are our hots. Let's work on them this week. Let's go. And that's what Eddie Faulkner was able to get done, was able to say, hey, this is the plan this week. There's no questions about it. Attack. And that gave the Steelers their surge with Mason Rudolph. And Matt Canada, the things that I've come to understand about his past in college, he had schematics that made total sense and were even somewhat innovative. Someone pointed out there was a week where both Sam Laporta and George Kittle caught wheel route touchdown passes down the sideline that were really well drawn up and got them wide open. And someone said, man, Matt Canada would never call that play. And then the person who posted it, I said, actually, they kind of got it from him because the Steelers used this against the Bengals last year. And we hadn't really seen this the way this one was used like that too often. So again, Matt Canada had some schematic ideas, but I don't think I think his biggest problem was trying to get everyone on the same page. And that's the point of an offensive coordinator, is to coordinate, to get people on the same page. It's not just calling the plays. It's not just, that's why like Eric Bienemy, when he was with the Chiefs and people were like, well, Andy Reid calls the plays. Yeah, but Eric Bienemy setting up the room. And that's where I think there could be an asset there. And that's what I think that's the biggest thing people need. The Steelers need right now is a person who will control that room and kind of be the person that Tomlin doesn't have to worry about who's in charge with the offense, like Todd Haley was. Like that's the fact of the matter is their last two hires were from within the organization. But let's be real, Randy Fichtner was a Ben Roethlisberger decision that was he wanted his guy. Why would you not listen to Ben Roethlisberger there? And Matt Canada, I Bleav, was because they was in a position where what offensive coordinator wanted to coach old man Ben Roethlisberger for one last year and potentially, be on the outs because Tomlin's contract situation wasn't totally solidified. So I think that they were in a bit of a hole and they said, well, let's give this guy a shot. We hired and brought him in, and then it just failed miserably. But I think this is like, okay, let's get back to getting someone in here. It's not an experiment, and they're getting a clean slate. They know they got some offensive line talent. They got some running backs. They got some playmakers. That your job, if you want to be a big head coach, turn Kenny Pickett into a respectable NFL quarterback or whoever the Steelers quarterback is next year and make this offense go from ranked 28th to like top 15. Do that, and I think that their offensive coordinators would be interested in that job.
Absolutely. And this is assuming they extend Tomlin's contract, which by all reports and indications, it's going to happen.
Yeah.
You mentioned Bienemy too, and this is not hindsight 2020, but after the Super Bowl win against the Eagles last year, go back and look at reports of motion that the Chiefs utilized to recognize coverage discrepancies against the Eagles. Who was it? No, it wasn't Mahomes. It wasn't it was Eric Bienemy who noticed those things, and they scored 2 touchdowns. If you go back and watch the tape from that game, that was Eric Bienemy, and it's no secret that the Chiefs offense struggled, at least during the regular season. We'll see how they fare in the AFC Championship game if they advance on to the Super Bowl. But the way that the Chiefs are winning games this year, much different than in seasons past, Chris. Much different. Important. And it's the defense, but it's also a lot of it's the absence of Eric Bienemy at the offensive coordinator position for the Kansas City Chiefs.
I agree. And that was one thing that I think Eric Bienemy, even though the offense at Washington didn't like take off or anything, I think this was a bit of a vindication for him because people realize, it was a little bit better. Now, granted, it also helps when you have, a few better weapons than, Justin Watkins and guys that they have behind Travis Kelce. But certainly, I think Eric Bienemy we can kind of see that guy is that guy's kind of earned his respect. And I think that someone else is going to give him a shot. If the Steelers give him a shot, I think it would be warranted, to say the least.
Any other names Steelers fans should keep an eye on when it comes to the search for a new OC?
So one guy that I popped that I've continued to mention is Kellen Moore. He's the Chargers offensive coordinator. He was most recently with the Cowboys before then under McCarthy, and about 3 of those 4 years he had a top 10 offense. And not that he's some super genius, but I think he's a guy he's worked with multiple veteran quarterbacks. He knows how to organize a room. He has inklings of modern offenses. That's what that can be part of something that you that you bring in, and it would be a different look. It'd be a younger coach. It could be a different kind of guy that leads that. I think that's another name that you there. Shane Waldron's now heading to the Bears, so he's off the market supposedly. But I think that there's some options there. Again, Klint Kubiak's an obvious one that everyone's going to talk about, and I'm not against the Klint Kubiak. Comes from a good system, is doing really good things with Kyle Shanahan. Darrell Bevell would be another one to bring in there. Anthony Lynn, Mike McCoy, guys like that, they're around. But the question will be when they bring them in, what is the look of these guys? And the Steelers also have to be prepared for, you bring one of these guys in, you also need to bring in potentially the next guy, because this offensive staff needs to evolve in the way that it thinks. And the Steelers have always believed in too many cooks in the kitchen spoils the soup, right? And they've wanted to keep their staff smaller because you're able to get more done in a room with less people, so to say. But Steelers are in a position where I think that model isn't helping them right now. They need more eyes, more ears, more brains to put together the plans and communications and things that they need to get this offense humming. That means not just an offensive coordinator. I think they might need a new quarterback coach. I think they keep Eddie Faulkner. But if they get an offensive line coach, what about a run game coordinator? Even if they get a receiver and a quarterbacks coach, get a pass game coordinator, or make sure that whoever you get to fill either of those positions is your pass game coordinator. and get a person in there who's young and innovative with your offensive coordinator, so that if things are popping off and your OC after 2 years, let's say Kenny Pickett turns into a Pro Bowl. I'm not saying it's going to happen, but let's say your offensive coordinator is that successful. They're going to get a head coaching job. That's just the way of the NFL. You need to be prepared to keep that ship afloat and have someone else in there that you have confidence in to rise up the ranks. So it won't just be the OC hire. It'll be who that OC is bringing in with them that could be a quick riser for the Steelers if the offense were to take off.
Chris, I want to live in that world, and the reason I say that is, like, initially it's like, well, if they hire a young hotshot coordinator and he gets hired away, let's have that. That is a good problem to have.
Absolutely.
Good problem to have. All right. Najee Harris, they have to decide between now and May 2nd whether to pick up his fifth-year option. He'd be designated to make about $6.6 million in the 2025 season. This one's tough for me because he's a professional. He stays healthy. He doesn't fumble the ball. I understand to start his career, Alfred Morris was the last player to have 3 consecutive 1,000-yard seasons. But the flip side I see is, like, okay, 4.1 yards per carry this past season. His longest rush in his NFL career is 37 yards. He's a chain mover. He's not going to take one the distance from 50, 60 yards out. I'm very conflicted on this, but, like, if I'm being honest here, Chris, just the value position of a running back in the NFL, I think you could replace that level of production with another back to complement Jaylen Warren. And I will say this too, if you don't pick up Najee's fifth-year option for 2025 and then 2024 becomes a contract season, maybe that raises Najee's level of play. But what say you? How would you handle this? Or how will the Steelers handle this from Najee Harris's contract standpoint?
From everything I've heard, they're going to extend him. They're going to sign the fifth-year extension, particularly because it's not just what he brings on the field. It's that this guy's a leader. Like, there's so many times where, things weren't going right. Like, Kenny Pickett took a hit, and the first person to get to him was Najee. Like, come on, Kenny, let's go. There was a time at the end of the Rams game where Tusa Okorafor is just mouthing off, doing something stupid, and almost gets a penalty, like getting into it with a Rams play. And you can even see some of the Rams defense like trying to egg him on to do something stupid so the Steelers get a penalty. It stops the clock, and then the kneeling out doesn't work. And who gets in the way? You see Najee Harris getting between them and just point, Chooks, go, like, get out of here. Like, he has the leadership and respect of the locker room that I think that is a big factor. I also think that Najee Harris, like, if we're being honest about, the yards per carry and the things and the numbers and everything, he hasn't had a good offensive line yet.
That's fair.
Like, 2021, I mean, Kendrick Green was the set. Like that was the 2022 was below average offensive line. This was a year where I think that this was the closest you could say was an average line. And that's because Broderick Jones was placed in midway through the season, and he brought some energy to the group. But they still weren't consistent. Mason Cole was terrible this year. Brett Danmore was terrible this year. Sayamalu started slow, picked up, and got better throughout the rest of the season. James Daniels was solid. So you got a rookie who was raw but good. You have a good veteran at one position and a decent veteran at another, and then 2 bad players. Like, there wasn't much chances for Najee Harris to break things off. He broke as many tackles this year as Raheem Mostert for the Dolphins. The difference was Raheem Mostert had a viable passing attack that made it so no one could pay attention to him as much as, Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle, and also had an offensive line that I think was a little bit more together. But when I look at Najee Harris, man, I see a guy who you give him that. He's viable. He is healthy. He's strong. And I think you're still only seeing the tip of the iceberg with him. And I said this last year. I said his first 3-year numbers are very similar to Marshawn Lynch and Derrick Henry's, who both started with not good offensive lines, were kind of figured things out, and all it took was a little bit of a passing game and a little bit of an upgrade on the offensive line, and both those guys took off. I mean, Ryan Tannehill made the difference for the Titans. Derrick Henry became King Henry. Marshawn Lynch, go look at his numbers when he started to when he blew up. I'm not saying that Najee Harris is going to be Derrick Henry or Marshawn Lynch, but I could see him making the steps up that make, like, when you give him a better offensive line. I think the Steelers need to get a center and another tackle, right or left, and then figure out who's where at the end at the training camp. and have a kick butt offensive line, have a passing attack that's solid and efficient, doesn't have to be elite, doesn't have to be top 10, just make it solid and efficient, not bottom of the league. Najee Harris and Jaylen Warren will be a deadly duo next year with those two things added to the Steelers offense. That's why you sign him to extension. That's why you keep him around. And I think if he does well next year and you have that 5th-year extension on, you get that, you extend him for about 2-3 more years after that at a reasonable price, so it's not killing your team. But I think that you can live. Le'Veon Bell wasn't a home run hitter, but he was dangerous. And it was because he could keep hitting you all season long. And imagine those Steelers in the 2010s with a healthy Le'Veon Bell, the way that Najee Harris has been healthy for most of his career.
Several things here, Chris.
Sure.
The leadership, let's start there. He was a captain before this past season. Then you got to give it to the QB with Kenny Pickett. So it's like, in terms of the leadership there, I think that speaks volumes in terms of what he brings to the locker room, how he comports himself professionally too. That's not what I'm talking about in any criticism that I have of Najee Harris.
Yeah, sure.
You mentioned the tackle positions too. Dan Moore Jr. entering the final year of his deal. You're paying him only about $2 million. So even if he's, say, substandard as a tackle, that is tremendous contract value for a player who will make more money further down the line. But I also want you to think about this too, is if Najee Harris had outright made the Pro Bowl as a rookie, remember he was an alternate, instead of that $6.6 million figure for 2025, it would be about $10.1 million. And we're having a much, much different conversation right now.
It would be. Yeah, we would be. That would be kind of crazy to think about that. And $10.1 million, that is tough, especially on a team where you're doing a lot of rebuilding. You want to make other signings. But at 6.6 right now, I think that is a great number that Omar Khan will happily lock down. And here's another thing. Let's see how he performs next year. And if the offensive line does take steps forward, or if there's a whole new direction to the offense, because that's the other thing. If someone comes in as an offensive coordinator and all of a sudden this becomes a good passing offense, not saying it's going to happen, but again, let's say we're exploring all the possibilities and the run game becomes less important, then you might not need a Najee Harris. Maybe you say, hey, you know what? He's not the focal point. We don't need to pay him as much. We'll keep Jaylen Warren and go get some guy in the draft after that. But I think right now, with the way that they're building, the way that they've wanted this team to become, I think that Najee Harris is a very important part of that. Also, while he doesn't have 50-yard runs, he does have the 4th most 15-yard runs in the NFL this year, only behind McCaffrey, Gibbs, and Henry on the season.
I see what you're doing there, Chris. And I know since he came into the league week 9 and on, he has like the most yards week 9 and on since he came to the NFL in the 2021 season. And we'll see. Like I said, I mean, how all of this plays out, you could kind of see some inklings about this when they were trying to work out Saquon Barkley's deal. And it was like, man, this is going to be a tough negotiation. Again, it's not Najee as a player. It's just the positional value of running backs in the NFL.
Agreed. It's a tough spot.
NFL. Few other things I want to get to, Chris, and we will wrap up here. Several Steelers are entering contract seasons in 2024. I wanted to ask you which player it was most important for, because, I mean, you could go Deontay Johnson, you could go Cam Hayward. Take this in any direction, and I'll piggyback from there.
I'd have to think about that throughout the whole list of guys who would be free agents next year. So
Patrick Peterson, Demonte Casey.
I guess Deontay Johnson is a big question. I'm not sure if he's the sure signing, because here's the other thing. I kind of anticipate the Steelers to pick a receiver early in this upcoming draft class. And why? Because Deontay Johnson next year will make $15.8 million against the cap, right? He is not under contract after that. And George Pickens will be coming up soon to get paid. And if you're the Steelers, you might not be able to afford to keep both of those guys. Probably won't. So you might be in a position where, hey, Deontay, sorry, man. You let him hit free agency, or you trade him this year. That's another thing. You could trade Deontay Johnson this year and then try to recoup that talent in the draft. George Pickens, your number one. Roll with that any way you will. I don't think that you will, because Deontay Johnson's route running ability is still too important to this offense and will help whatever quarterback starts next year. But I think that's going to be a tough decision to handle, because you want to keep George Pickens long term. I think that he's showing all the tools.
No doubt.
So how you keep Deontay Johnson or how you move on from Deontay Johnson could prove vital for the Steelers' hopes to keep the balance, keep the team afloat. I wonder if this, how the Steelers try to make other guys work. Cam Hayward is a $22.4 million cap hit next season. It's the final year of his deal. He says he wants to keep playing. He says he doesn't want to retire. Would he take an extension? Would he take like a 2-year extension or a 1-year extension where you can add on some void years and spread that money down the line a little bit so that you could be a little bit more aggressive in free agency? I think that's a legitimate question if you're the Steelers. I think that if you're looking at other guys, Pat Freiermuth is another guy who, his contract's going to be coming up soon. And I think that Pat Freiermuth, at the rate that you pay tight ends in this NFL and the way he hasn't become a premier tight end yet, you get him at a great price. And then he's a primary weapon for your offense for the next 4 years with whoever's your quarterback.
They would target him, Chris.
Yeah, that's another point. That's another thing that you need this OC to do is to say, hey, that dude exists. Throw a football, especially down the middle part of the field.
I think it's no doubt you'd want to keep Pickens over Deontay, though, because to me, with Mason Rudolph's success this last year, it's like, well, what's the biggest difference between 2023 and 2019? It's like one team had George Pickens and one team did not. It's an oversimplification, but if I could explain that very quickly, that's what I would point out to people.
No, I think that's a very good way to put it. I think it's accurate, and I think it's also, as bad as Matt Canada was at organizing the offense, these playmakers knew who they were. Whereas in 2019, without Ben Roethlisberger, that team was like, oh crap, what are we supposed to do? What are we supposed to look like? And I've said this before, like years ago. Randy Fichtner, imagine you get hired for a job and you're told, buddy, you get Ben Roethlisberger. He's killing it right now. You get Le'Veon Bell. You get Antonio Brown. You get Martavis Bryant and Juju Smith-Schuster. You are ready to rock, sir. And then, like, within 2 years, all of them are gone.
It's like the Wizard of Oz.
Yeah, just poof. And it's just like, what happened? I just I feel like that's something that should be taken into consideration too, is that's also what Mason Rudolph was dealing with the first time around, was that offense, was designed in 2018 when he was first drafted to work with Le'Veon Bell. And in 2019, they knew they didn't have Brown and Bell, but needed to find that identity. And Ben Roethlisberger was supposed to be the guy who was supposed to lead you into that, and you couldn't. This year, whereas they were still searching for their identity, you had a player like Najee Harris in the backfield who you could get behind. You had an offensive line that was figuring things out a little bit more. You had explosive playmakers at different positions to build on that. And I think you'd had time to kind of get that moving forward. And Kenny Pickett was a second-year quarterback who was a guy who at least set a tone for what the offense should look like on the times that they had hit. So, yeah, I think that there's going to be some interesting points for this offense to move forward.
All right. Before I get you out of here, Chris, I got to know your Super Bowl picks now that we're into the conference championship weekend.
Oh, my Super Bowl picks. I got Ravens, Niners. And the Ravens smacked up the Niners so hard. I have to think that the Niners are I think the Niners are gonna find a way to win it. They're both really complete rosters. I think the Ravens caught them off guard with a few things. They'll find a way to fight back. I would really like to see Ravens. I really like to see the Lions in there. That I have so many friends
would go crazy.
It would be. I have so many friends who are Lions fans who are like, this whole process. I've been texting them. Shout out to my friend Jamie Cremines. We went to law school together, and she was in the stadium for the first playoff win. And she was like, I texted her, and it was like an hour later. She texts back like, "We're still here. Like no one's leaving." Like that kind of stuff is special. So like, as far as like seeing something amazing in sports, I'd love to see the Lions win. But just if I'm picking with my head, I think Ravens, Niners make it. They're the two most complete rosters. And I think the Niners have a little bit of payback for the Ravens for the way the Ravens dogged them earlier in the season.
Yeah, I mean, I pointed this out. It's as simple as the fact that I haven't been alive to see the Lions win a playoff game, let alone now that they're into the NFC Championship game. And they've had a great home field advantage to this point in the playoffs too, which has been awesome to watch. And what's been a tortured fan base when we saw another tortured fan base with the Bills last night, but
that was rough.
The conspiracy theorist in me still thinks that the Chiefs somehow get to the Super Bowl, even though the offense has just been downright bad this season. But I do have the 49ers beating the Chiefs in the Super Bowl. We will see. But I do think there's a huge difference between this week with the Ravens defense that's firing on all cylinders versus all of the injuries that Buffalo had to its defense.
Absolutely. I think it's no given. Like I'm never a person that comes out and says like this is the law and this is definitely what's gonna happen. Both of these teams are too talented. And listen, with all the problems the Chiefs have on their offense, they still have the best quarterback in football.
Yep.
Like even though Lamar Jackson will win, should win MVP, and I think that's where it should go. Patrick Mahomes is still ridiculous, and you have to stop him at every turn, or he is going to kill you. And I think that's something you shouldn't discount. I got Ravens Niners, but I wouldn't mind Chiefs Lions. That'd be a cool David versus Goliath story.
All of Detroit, and you'd have Eminem versus Taylor Swift with the music off the field too. Your tweet cracked me up, Chris, when I saw it, where it's like who draws the straw to get the Taylor Swift camera shot. That cracked me up, man.
I had some Swifties that was like, what do you mean who draws the short straw for that? I'm like, listen, I'm not saying no one likes her. I'm even saying it's cool that she likes the sport and people like that are tuning in for it. I'm not mad at that. All I'm saying is if I'm the cameraman and my job was to just keep my eyes on Taylor Swift while these two juggernauts are duking it out on the football field, I'd be a little upset because I'm like, this is Bills Chiefs. That's the whole reason my cameraman is to cover this guy of the game, and I got to stare at a press box. That was my only point.
Her boyfriend was showing off yesterday too. Just saying.
Listen, Travis, I told people Travis is not cooked. It's just that good defenses were taking him away and saying, Patrick, beat me with Rashee Rice. You know, like do other things. But yeah, I'm excited though, man. These are some great teams. We've seen some great playoff football. And I think that I think it's gonna be really competitive. I also am not of the opinion. I'll ask you this question, Mark. People love to say every time there's a playoff team and your playoff team isn't in it, this team is so far away from becoming that team. I think the Steelers are an above average game manager quarterback away from banging with all four of the teams that are in the conference championships right now. I think if you had a Jared Goff even, they don't lose to the Patriots, the Cardinals, the Colts during that stretch, which means with the other game, they would have been better in their other games. They still probably lose to the Niners and the Texans and games like that. But I think that propels the team to those wins. If they win those 3 games, that last game against Baltimore, not only for the division, it would be for the 1 seed. And they would have been the team that could have been the tough team to beat, make everyone come to Pittsburgh, play the style of ball. I don't think the Steelers are that far from being one of those teams. Now, the key is getting the quarterback is one of the hardest things to do in developing players in all sports. So in that job, that is a tough hill to climb. But I think it is mainly one hill, offensive coordinator, you got to make the right hire. That is a hill itself. But personnel-wise, they get a quarterback that can make plays and an offense that's just efficient. Doesn't have to be elite, just efficient. That Steelers team, the way it's constructed right now, as long as they, TJ Watt, Minka Fitzpatrick, Najee Harris, George Pickens, as long as all those guys are back next year, I think that the Steelers team with a decent quarterback play and a good and an efficient offense are a serious contender.
I'm with you, and maybe this is just the Yinzer perspective, but it's like there was no one in the AFC this year that struck total fear in my heart.
Nope.
Because
even the Bills, they won by 2 touchdowns with 2 turnovers. And that was without TJ Watt. I even said that the Bills were probably the worst draw the Steelers could get of the 3 teams they could have played on the first game of the playoffs. But I was also like, if they can win the turnover, if the Steelers can win the turnover battle, they got a shot. They lost it, and they lost by how many scores they turned the ball over by. So, again, I don't think they're that far.
I wish we would have lived in a world where the Steelers would have somehow gotten out of the wild card round in that Baltimore matchup in the divisional round. And all the Ravens fans were like, oh, why are you celebrating? You beat our backups. And it's like, Steelers have won 7 of the last 8 against Baltimore. And and look, they're the number 1 seed, first round bye, all that. I get it. But it felt different to me than compared to 2 years before in Roethlisberger's final season when you go and play Kansas City, where it's like we have no shot
Agreed.
It felt different to me. I'm with you. Chris, go ahead and plug whatever you need to. You are always terrific and always enjoy your coverage with the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette and then watching you on Locked On Steelers. But please feel free to take the floor to plug anything that you need to.
Thank you so much, Mark. My name is Christopher Carter. You can follow me on Twitter and Instagram and all my social media accounts at Carter Critiques. Follow me there. Read my work at the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette, post-gazette.com. Check me out on the North Shore Drive podcast for the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, and sometimes Saturday. It depends on what our schedule is. But every Monday through Friday, we got the Locked On Steelers podcast. Also, Channel 11 WPXI here in Pittsburgh whenever we're breaking things down. I wear all the hats, Mark.
I'm pretty sure they've figured out a way to clone you, Chris.
That's my secret.
Thank you so much. For Christopher Carter, I'm Mark Bergin. Thanks for watching Bleav in Steelers. Be back later this week with Ike Taylor. Take care. So long, everybody.